Hello and welcome to the Christopher Holt Training Podcast, where we're going to be talking about bone health and the training that helps maintain good health within the bones. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you want to learn more about this topic, click the link down in the description, or there'll be one on the screen somewhere which will take you through to my strength training newsletter, which will go out monthly, and it will help you sort of understand strength training and its benefits. In part one, we're going to be talking about bones as a whole. So build a bit of understanding of what bones are, and in some respects, how they work. So very simplistically, there are, let's just say, two parts to bones. There's like an inner shell, or an inner matrix, and an outer shell, if you will. So the outer bone is known as cortical bone. This is the strong stuff. So this is where it gets its strength from. This is where it gets its rigidity from. And it's known as cortical bone. Then you have the inner matrix, if you will. This is where bone gets its sort of durability from, its flexibility. Both parts are dynamic in so much as they respond to the stresses put on top of them or through them. And that's a part of what we're going to talk about today. This is really only why we're talking about these two parts of bones. There are other parts, but with regards to what we're talking about, the most relevant parts are the sort of the cortical strength, cortical bone, which is the strength, and then you've got the inner trabecular bone, which is the flexibility, which is the matrix. So when you see the diagrams online of this, in some respects quite elegant structure of bone, generally it's that inner matrix. And we're talking about the density of the bone and maintaining the density of the bone. Now, the reason why we have these two is that if we only had the cortical bone, bones would be very rigid, and they wouldn't have the flexibility to them. And what comes, albeit they're strong, but what comes with that rigidity to it, they're more liable for breaking because they don't have the flexibility and the ability to absorb shocks and things like that. If we had only the trabecular bone, again, bones would probably be a little bit too soft, they'd be too flexible, so on and so forth. So you put the two together and you get the strength and the flexibility. So you get the ability to absorb shock, and you get the ability to be strong as well. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. And whenever you look through the body, whatever tissue you're looking at, whatever organ, whatever system you're looking at within the body, what you will generally find is that best of both worlds. So it's not too far slung in one direction, it's not too far slung in the other direction. It's kind of got the best of both. Then another important part for bones is the fact that muscles join onto them. They join via a tendon. There is no absolute boundary of muscle tendon to bone. They kind of merge into each other. So there is an overlap. So there is no definite line of bone, tendon, muscle. The tendons do join on via another part of the bone called the periosteum, which is a bit like an outer layer, if you will, to the bone, which it joins onto. And this allows, again, if we sort of went further, it allows the transport of nutrients in and waste out as well. So that, again, is sort of a layer that does that, but we're not here to talk about that. Then we have bones respond to muscle activity and load that goes through. So bone is a malleable tissue. It has the ability to change and adapt to the environment set in front of it. So bones will become stronger, healthier, more dense with regular activity, because they are responding to the stresses put on them from muscular contraction, or that's one of them. Obviously, if you're running, you've got the impact going up through as well. So there will be impact will be a part of it, but also muscle tension, muscle contraction, muscle usage will allow bones to be healthy, stronger, more dense. If you take that away, the whole principle, I mean, if you can take one thing from this, it would be, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's the same with muscles, it's the same with bone. So we've got to keep load going through. So it's not just as easy to say, right, I've built my bone, now I'm going to stop, because when you stop, it will have that drop off. So with regards to bones, the two main parts that we're talking about are the cortical bone, which is the sort of the stiffer, stronger structure to the outer part of the bone, and then you've got the trabecular, which is like the inner matrix, which gives its sort of durability and flexibility to absorb shock without breaking, as long as the shock isn't too much. Then we have the fact that muscles join onto them and that the bones respond to the load going through them through impact and muscle contraction. So what we'll now do in part 2 is we'll talk about the life course of a bone. So what happens through our lives to our bones and how we can go about keeping them as healthy as possible. It's a relatively simple life course. When we are at our youngest, so when in sort of childhood, the bone goes sort of through its modelling phase. So it starts as cartilage. So it's very flexible. Minerals get laid down and it starts to turn into what we know as bone. They get their shape, they get their size, or they start to get their shape and they start to get their size. Obviously, the size will continue through into adolescence, and then we get the growth spurt, and then off they go again. When we get up to puberty, they get sort of thicker, stronger. That's when we get our growth spurt, and you get the extra length to them. Or certainly, well, all bones get bigger, but most notably what we know as the long bones. So long bones are leg bones, the femur. Then you've got the tibia and fibula of the lower leg, radius and ulna in the lower arm, and then the humerus in the upper arm. So they're the ones, when you sort of see the shaft of the bone with the knobbly bits on either end, they're your long bones. Obviously the short bones, the irregular bones, so on and so forth, they are all getting bigger as well. So they are sort of staying optimized with each other. Obviously you can't have long bones growing and then the shorter bones not growing with them, if that makes sense. So, but yes, I'm kind of talking unnecessary things now. But when we get into our 20s, that's kind of when they are fully formed. So the length, the highest, let's say, density will be there. So that's the time really to take advantage of it, because the denser and thicker you can get them in your 20s, the better that's going to be 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And a phase called remodeling kicks off. So this is sort of bone maintenance, if you will. So it's a remodeling. There's a repairing mechanism in there. So again, when we're training, when we're exercising, when we're living our life, Small cracks will appear in bone. They aren't bone breaks. They are just natural remodeling happening. And it's these small little cracks in bones that the body will respond to, because it will recognise them and it will lay down thicker bone. So when we do our strength training, as we're going to talk about later, it will form very, very microscopic cracks in the bone. And then the body will go, hang on a minute, I don't want this to continue. It will lay down thicker bone. So we exercise again. We crack and sort of break the thicker bone with these microscopic traumas. And the body goes, right, okay, it's still cracking. I need to make it thicker. And that's how we maintain bone density. And it's also a store for calcium and phosphorus. So those are sort of nutrients. They are minerals. They are essential sort of building blocks for the bone. But they are also a mineral store. If the body becomes demineralized enough, it will use that as a reservoir or a source of those minerals. Obviously, as I've talked about, it's clearing old bone, it's laying down new bone. So it's a very dynamic tissue. A lot of people may think that it's a static tissue. It grows, it stops, you've got it, and you're all good. Whereas, although there is a drop off as you get older, there is a way of maintaining it, and that's in some respects what we're going to be talking about. Because as we go from our 20s into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that is when the decline happens in the bone. It's built into the system, so it's going to happen whether one likes it or not. The main thing is keeping it loaded so that mechanism is slowed as much as possible. And that's where exercise comes in. So it's not about just doing exercise in your 20s, 30s and 40s, and then by 50 you're too old to exercise, because then you'll sort of maintain it, but then you'll get that steeper drop off when you stop doing the exercise. So it's about doing exercise for the long term. So you get a lot of experts talking about certain types of exercise, but certain types of exercise are sort of designed with sport in mind, and a professional sporting career, let's just say, ends at about sort of 35, although now it's starting to go a little bit longer into the late 30s, and then they stop doing their sport and they have a decline in their body. Whereas we need to think about something a little bit more optimal. So it's not about doing bodybuilding training. It's not about doing powerlifting training. It's not about doing specific sports training, because at some point you can wear the body out with that, and then that has its effect. So, but that will be, again, that's more for a strength training type episode, where I'll talk to you about the optimal type of training for it. This is more about talking about bone health, its density, and then we're going to touch on some exercise, and I'll try not to go off on too many tangents with that. What we then have within the bone that allows this process to happen are basically two bone cells: osteoblasts, osteoclasts. Osteoblasts are your bone builders. So as we go through childhood, adolescence into our 20s, they are the most active. So they are laying down more bone than is being cleared away, because the bones are getting bigger, stronger, thicker, more dense. What we then get when we hit our sort of, let's just say, mid-20s, is we get greater activity from the osteoclasts, which are the bone clearers. So they clear old bone away, where the blasts have laid down the new bone. But what starts to happen is that balance goes from, as we are younger, you get osteoblasts, higher activity. As we get into our mid-20s, that starts to happen. And then obviously that trend continues. So what we want to try and do is try and keep that blasts and class activity as close as we can together. And that's where the exercise comes in. So it's very much being able to maintain that bone density, but that bone cell activity as much as we can. And that's where exercise is such a useful tool. If we were much more active as a species in this modern world, then that will kind of take care of it to some degree. But unfortunately, we aren't as active as we could be, and that is, in some respects, to the detriment of muscles and bones, because we aren't using it and therefore we are losing it. So in order to maintain good bone and muscle health, we need to use exercise to be able to do it. So what we'll do in part 3 is talk about some good exercises, why we're doing them, and some caveats that sort of come along with that. And good exercises are, most importantly, they're heavy exercises. So if you want to use some technical terms, people may say 85% of your 1 rep max. Now, I don't recommend you going out and doing a 1 rep max test. What's more useful is finding an exercise that you can lift 6 times or 5 times. And if you've got probably one more lift, so you lift your 6 and then you put the weight down and you go, yeah, I probably could have done one more. That's your weight, essentially. So it needs to be heavy. Why does it need to be heavy? Because we need the bending stresses from the muscles for the bones to react to. If we've got that high muscle activity, then we've got bone activity, essentially. So we're using heavy weights. So if you go in, and this is in part where fitness marketing is a little bit flawed, and it depends on the individual and their state, which we're going to talk about in a second. But fitness marketing will say this exercise is great for bone health, but it's using 1 kilo dumbbells and you're holding them for minutes at a time. If it's that type of exercise, it's probably not going to be hugely advantageous for bones. If you are a little more frail and out of condition with regards to exercise, then it's a good place to start. But if you only ever do that, it's not really going to have an effect. You need to do what is called strength training. Now, strength training isn't just a case of lifting weights, as I've mentioned. It's lifting a specific intensity of weight, a weight that you can lift 6 times and probably do one more. And then you would do that, say, for 3 sets, and you may just do 4 or 5 exercises of it. It doesn't need to be a lot, because, as I've mentioned, they need to be big exercises. So they don't need to be big exercises, just more advantageous that they're big exercises, because you can get more muscles working at the same time and you get a similar stimulus all throughout the body. So, as an example, a good exercise is a back squat. So a back squat is with a barbell on your back. So you've got the compression weight going down through your body because the weight is on your back. So it's going right down through the spine into the pelvis either side and then going down the legs as well. So you get that with regards to the bar literally trying to squash your body into the floor. So you get that aspect of it. You also get ankle bending, knee bending, hip bending, and maintenance of proper spine position. What does all of that mean? All of that means the whole of those leg muscles are working. Lower leg, thigh, hip muscles, and then because we're maintaining proper position of the spine, you also get the muscle tension through the torso as well. So you get sort of 3/4 of the body, let's say, as long as it's heavy enough, working very hard to maintain the position that you're in, but also to complete the movement that you're doing. It has a degree of functionality to it in that it's squatting down and squatting up, like you would squat down into a seat and get back up out of a seat. So it has that part to it as well. So it's a very advantageous exercise, but as long as it's heavy, that's probably the most important thing. Then comes the deadlift. Again, there's the functionality thing of you're lifting something off the floor. Again, it's a heavy weight, so it's developing grip strength because you're lifting a weight off the floor. You've got the whole lower body working, and you've got the upper body, because when you lift that off the floor, because you're holding onto the weight sort of in front of you or by your side, again the weight is pulling down on the arms, which again is compressing the body into the floor. So again, the body's got to react to that compression. So it reacts to the movement and the compression that you're doing. But it won't do the upper body quite as much, which would then come into exercises like overhead pressing and like bench pressing or dumbbell pressing or something to that effect. So overhead press is where you stand up, you'll have a barbell or a couple of dumbbells, and you press the weight up over your head. Again, that has a functionality to it because you're lifting something up onto a high shelf. So it has that ability to develop that. But also you get the compression that now is coming down through the arms. And because it's an overhead press, you get the elbow bend, you get the shoulder bend, which is getting all of those muscles of the arm working, and you've kind of got the grip strength to go with it. So you've got the forearm muscles and the hand working as well. So you can start to see now that there are a lot of exercises, or there are a lot of muscles and bones being impacted by just these first three exercises. You kind of covered the whole body in essence. Bench press is where you lie down on a bench and you push the weight off your chest. Now that again, it's perfectly good exercise, but it does only go through upper body. Obviously the lower body isn't getting anything because you haven't got that reaction going down through the legs because you're led down on a bench. But it's a perfectly good exercise. Do the bench press. Just because it doesn't have a sort of a functionality to it, or it doesn't do the lower body, then that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Any sort of pulling exercise, so rows, pull-ups, those types of exercises, again, very heavy. All back muscles are working, arm muscles are working, shoulder muscles are working. So all the bones that are covered by those muscles, they are being stimulated. So those are very good exercises to go with it. The only thing that you will miss with pulls is you don't get the compression because you're pulling the weight towards you rather than it being on top of you, if that makes sense. But again, that's not a reason not to do the exercise. They are very good exercises. It's just the squat, the deadlift and the overhead press, you just have that added compression with it. That's the only difference. But most importantly, they need to be heavy. Like I said at the start, you need to be able to do 6 reps and probably one more for 3 sets. The caveat that comes with it, if you are new to exercise or if you are exploring bone health and bone density and things like that, then it's probably not a good place to start. You probably want to build a degree of condition into the body as a precursor. So build some muscular endurance, build some core strength, improve flexibility of joints so you can move through these exercises a lot more effectively. Now you can do these exercises, or you can do this type of training, just maybe not with these exercises done in a particular way. It will just be smaller exercises like bicep curls, like leg extensions on machines and things like that, just to get the body stimulated in that way. If you go straight in, it's a bit like you're throwing yourself in the deep end. What's more effective is if you start in the shallow end, walk down the steps, get used to the water, get used to the depth of the water, and then work your way down to the deep end of the pool, which is doing the heavy squats, the heavy deadlifts, and things like that, when your body has a degree of capacity to cope with all those stresses a little bit more effectively. Because if you can think of like a pyramid, strength training is starting to move you up the pyramid. There is still a base that needs to be built within the body to be able to manage the stresses, because it is a very stressful type of training, not only for the bones, not only for the muscles, but also for the nervous system. because it has to stimulate all of this, not only at the time, but it's then got to stimulate the growth and the repair after as well. So the nervous system has to work for that much longer, which can be tiring. So it's you don't necessarily feel the burn, it's just exhausting because it's very heavy. And again, I could talk more about this type of training, which I will do in future podcast episodes, and the caveats and how to build into it and things like that. So that will all come eventually. But for now, you've got bones, what they are, how they're sort of grown, if you will, their sort of life course, how they get stronger, and then how they sort of break down as life goes on. And then you've got some examples of good exercises with some caveats of who should be doing it, when they should be doing it. And probably the most important thing that comes with all of this, it needs to be heavy. You need to be able to complete 6 reps and probably 1 more. Many thanks for watching. Hopefully this episode has been helpful. If you've enjoyed it, hit the like button. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button. If you've got a comment or a question, leave it below. And if you want to watch more like this, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon.